Something didn't add up. And when the math collapses this spectacularly in a congressional hearing, you know you're witnessing more than just bad bookkeeping. I've covered enough political theater to recognize when someone's hiding something. But what happened between Rand Paul and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem wasn't theater. It was a real-time exposure of how this administration handles $46 billion of your money. And the answer? They can't explain where most of it goes. Let me walk you through what really happened in that hearing room. Because beneath Paul's characteristic bluntness was a devastating mathematical reality that Noem simply could not address. And her failure to do so reveals something far more troubling than mismanaged border policy. Paul came prepared. He had the numbers. The administration wants $46.5 billion for border wall construction. The Mexican border stretches roughly 1,950 miles. About 700 miles already have fencing or walls. That leaves approximately 1,200 miles of open border. Paul acknowledged that 200 to 300 miles are mountainous terrain where construction is impossible or impractical. So realistically, we're talking about 1,000 miles of border that could feasibly be walled. Here's where the math gets interesting. Customs and Border Protection estimates construction costs at $6.5 million per mile. Noem, in her testimony, cited $12 million per mile. Let's use her higher number. 1,000 miles at $12 million per mile equals $12 billion. Total project cost using the administration's own inflated estimates. So where's the other $34 billion going? Paul asked this question directly, repeatedly, and Noem's response was nothing. She talked about steel barriers versus temporary fencing. She mentioned contract allocations. She cited infrastructure beyond just the wall itself. But she never, not once, provided numbers that explained the massive discrepancy. Think about what this means. The Department of Homeland Security is asking Congress for nearly 4 times what their own estimates suggest the project should cost. And when pressed for specifics, the Secretary of Homeland Security has no answer. This isn't a minor accounting error. This is either gross incompetence or deliberate obfuscation of how taxpayer money gets spent. I've seen politicians dodge questions before, but usually they have talking points. Usually they pivot to safer ground or blame predecessors or cite classified information they can't discuss publicly. Noem did none of that. She simply restated information that made Paul's point for him. 702 miles of existing wall, with 598 miles being steel barriers. 70 miles constructed since this administration took office. 11 contracts awarded, 5 more pending. None of that explains where $34 billion goes. But here's what makes this exchange truly revealing. Paul wasn't trying to kill border security funding. He was trying to understand it. This is Rand Paul, a senator known for fiscal hawkishness and skepticism of government spending. If anyone should be cutting border security budgets, it's him. Instead, he's asking for basic accountability. Show me the math, explain the numbers, justify the request, and the administration can't do it. This speaks to something I've observed throughout my career covering federal agencies. When bureaucrats can't explain their own budget requests, it's usually because those budgets aren't based on actual needs. They're based on what agencies think they can get away with asking for. They pad numbers, inflate estimates, and hope nobody does the math. Paul did the math. The conversation then shifted to something even more concerning. Paul brought up DHS's role in providing security for major sporting events, the NFL, FIFA World Cup events. These are billion-dollar enterprises generating massive profits. Yet American taxpayers foot the bill for their security costs. When Paul asked whether the NFL reimburses DHS for security services, Noem's answer was telling, "Not to my knowledge." She didn't say no definitively. She didn't explain the policy rationale. She didn't even seem to understand why this might be problematic. The NFL generates billions in revenue, charges thousands of dollars for Super Bowl tickets, yet expects taxpayers to subsidize their security needs. This is corporate welfare disguised as national security. And Noem's casual acknowledgement of it reveals how normalized this arrangement has become within DHS. They don't even question whether profit-making entities should pay for the government services they consume. Paul's point was simple and devastating. The average taxpayer who can't afford Super Bowl tickets is paying for Super Bowl security. The working families struggling with inflation are subsidizing security for FIFA events where the cheapest tickets cost more than most people's monthly rent. But the most disturbing part of this hearing came when Paul raised the Quiet Skies surveillance program. This is where the conversation moved from fiscal mismanagement to constitutional violations. Tulsi Gabbard, a former congresswoman, was apparently surveilled by federal air marshals, not because of any criminal activity, not because of any terrorist threat, but because she ended up on some government watch list that nobody can adequately explain. Air marshals were assigned to ride on flights with her, monitor her movements, document her behavior. Think about this. A former member of Congress, someone who served in the military, someone who held one of the highest security clearances in government, was being surveilled by the very agencies she once helped oversee. And when the current Homeland Security Secretary is asked about this, her response is bureaucratic mumbling about repercussions and reforms. Noem didn't deny it happened. She didn't explain the justification. She didn't outline the safeguards that prevent this kind of abuse. She promised to get back to Paul with more information. This is how civil liberties die, not through dramatic constitutional crises, but through the gradual normalization of surveillance overreach. Programs expand beyond their original scope. Watch lists grow beyond their intended targets. And when congressional oversight finally notices, the response is always the same. We'll look into it, we'll provide more information later, we'll implement reforms. Paul also mentioned another case, an air marshal's spouse, possibly connected to January 6th events, who was being surveilled by other air marshals, federal agents monitoring federal agents' families, the surveillance state eating itself. What's particularly chilling is Noem's response to all of this. She acknowledged problems existed, she promised changes were coming, but she provided no timeline, no specific reforms, no concrete assurances that these abuses would stop. This is the same pattern we've seen with every surveillance scandal over the past decade. Initial denial, followed by limited acknowledgement, followed by promises of internal review, followed by minor procedural changes that don't address the fundamental problem. The agencies involved never lose funding. The officials responsible never face consequences. The programs continue under different names or with slightly modified procedures. And here's what really concerns me about Noem's testimony. She seems genuinely unaware of how problematic these revelations are. When Paul describes Tulsi Gabbard being surveilled by air marshals, Noem doesn't express outrage or shock. She doesn't seem to understand why monitoring a former congresswoman might violate basic principles of democratic governance. Her response suggests this kind of surveillance is just another administrative task that occasionally requires minor adjustments. This is bureaucratic capture in real time. Agencies become so insulated from public accountability that they lose sight of their constitutional boundaries. They start treating American citizens like potential threats to be monitored rather than people to be protected. And when confronted with evidence of overreach, their first instinct isn't to respect civil liberties. It's to protect institutional prerogatives. The $46 billion question Paul raised isn't really about border walls. It's about whether this administration can be trusted with vast amounts of public money and vast amounts of public authority. When they can't explain where billions of dollars go, when they can't justify why taxpayers subsidize corporate events, when they can't prevent surveillance programs from targeting political figures, the answer becomes clear. They can't. This hearing exposed something that should alarm every American regardless of political affiliation. We have federal agencies operating with minimal accountability, spending money they can't explain, running programs they can't justify, surveilling people they shouldn't be monitoring. And when Congress tries to exercise basic oversight, the response is evasive non-answers and promises to provide information later. This is how democratic institutions deteriorate, not through dramatic coups or constitutional crises, but through the gradual erosion of accountability mechanisms that keep government power in check. When agencies can't explain their spending, when they can't justify their actions, when they can't respect basic civil liberties, they become dangers to the democratic system they're supposed to protect. Rand Paul's questioning revealed all of this in less than 10 minutes of congressional testimony. The math doesn't work. The accountability doesn't exist. The safeguards have failed, and Kristi Noem's inability to address any of these concerns tells us everything we need to know about how this administration views its responsibilities to the American people. They view us as funding sources, not as citizens deserving answers. The real question isn't where the missing $34 billion is going. The real question is whether we're going to demand better than this from our government.